Research instruments. Want to explain how to design the instruments. If you are working with working on a primary study, recall that primary studies are studies that make use of primary data, while secondary studies are studies that make use of secondary data. Primary data refers to data that you collect firsthand as the researcher, data collected from source, while secondary data refer to data that you collect from someone who has already collected that data. That is, you're collecting it second hand. Maybe it was stored in a data repository or something, or it was recorded and kept somewhere, and then you are using that data. That becomes secondary data. So this instrument design refers to how some of the things we should know when we're trying to design, let's say, a questionnaire, or if we're designing an instrument for primary data collection. And this instrument design class is for those who are working with human participants. Yeah, those who are working with human participants. So here are some things you should note. Avoid personal or sensitive classification questions. In research, there are two kinds of questions. Classification questions, which are used to, they are more of demographics, used to, examine the patterns of the responses that have been received. And then investigative questions or target questions, that is, questions that are actually addressing the phenomenon under study. Avoid asking personal or sensitive classification questions unless you're using those classification questions, like maybe gender or age, unless you're using it to either serve as filter for inclusion or exclusion of participants, or you want to use it to examine some patterns which will help you in explaining the phenomenon you're investigating. If you're not using it for any of this, then avoid asking personal or sensitive classification questions. For filters, if you want to use such classification questions for filter, ask it at the beginning, so that you can ask, maybe if you are working on a study that is for women, you ask about gender, male or female. If the respondent picks male, then you know that that questionnaire is invalid, or that that response is invalid because it's a male, whereas the study you're working on is for female. So for such reasons, you can ask classification questions at the beginning. For patterns, you can ask it at the end. Why? So that your respondent would have already responded to the real things, to the real issues you want to investigate. And then when it comes to the demographics, or it comes to the classification question, they have already given you the main thing you need. So it's not going to be so much of an issue. So at the end, you can say something like, "Thank you for responding to the above questions. We'd like to know more about you. Kindly let us know your location, your age, your this," and then they can just stick it. It's easier for you to put it at the end and then get a favorable response than at the beginning, because some of these questions can turn off your respondent. Ask objective questions. Try to avoid yes or no questions. So if it's for the investigative questions, and then you're using what is called Likert scale questionnaire, that's questionnaire that makes use of scales, like say strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. That is a 4-point scale. When you have neither agree nor disagree included, that's a 5-point scale. If you want to be objective when using for such quantitative study, it's usually good to include a don't know option. So the don't know option is used for the purpose of objectivity. Sometimes it's coded as 0. We'll talk more about this when we get to data and data coding. So the don't know option is different from someone who is undecided. So I may know about an issue, okay, but I'm kind of undecided. I'm sort of in between the responses. I can't really agree, neither do I disagree. Okay. It's different from someone who maybe the question doesn't even apply to them, you know, or they don't know. It's different. So if you want to be objective, so that you don't have people who do not have any idea about the issue you're investigating, you don't have that feeling you're undecided, which could be a scale of its own. You can include a don't know option for the purpose of objectivity. Next, apply parsimony. That is, try to make your questionnaire or your instrument as short and as simple as possible. Make sure that it's simple enough or it's short enough to cover the issues you want to investigate. Try not to use lengthy questions because it can bore your respondents to some extent. Then ask investigative questions. Ask questions that evoke responses. Try to avoid yes or no questions if you want to investigate an issue. So it's different for you to ask someone, it's not ideal for you to ask someone, did you eat this morning? The response will be yes or no. But if you want to ask an investigative question about the person's meal pattern or the person's eating habits, you can say something like, can you explain what your meal pattern is like every morning? So if the person did not eat in the morning, the person will tell you, well, when I wake up in the morning, I usually just have to rush up to work, so I don't have time for food. That gives you the impression that the person did not eat in the morning, instead of just asking the person, did you eat in the morning? So avoid yes or no options if you're interested in addressing investigative questions. That is the main variable of the study. Try to ensure that your questions are logically arranged so that it does not disorganize your respondents' thoughts. So emotional intelligence is necessary here. You want to ask the question in such a way that it takes them from point A to point B to point C, and not that it takes them to point E and then takes them to point A and brings them back to D. It can disorganize your respondents' thoughts. Use validated instruments. Validation simply refers to the validity, you know, how relevant is your instrument? Is your instrument asking the question it's supposed to answer? That is validity. Reliability refers to the reliable quality, or how reliable is the data to be obtained. That is, if your instrument is used in this setting and it gives a particular result, when it is used in another setting, does it give similar results? If yes, then your instrument is reliable. If no, then it's not reliable. So to have a valid instrument, it can be self-validated. That is, you can come up with the questions by yourself. But when you come up with the questions by yourself, apply a variety of self-validation techniques such as pre-test, pilot study, expert opinion. Then you have to test it statistically if it's for a quantitative study. For qualitative study, you can use, and even quantitative study, you can use existing validation, that is validation by existing study. So there are some other studies that are related to your field, and then some of them may have even done or asked questions, relevant questions that you also find useful. Instead of designing the questions again from the start, you can just adopt their question and say it in your methodology that you, for this question, this, you modified the question from the study of researcher A or B or C. Once if you are using an already validated skill for your study, maybe the study was rigorously, or the skill was validated rigorously, the researcher spent so much time validating that instrument, then instead of going to do a revalidation, you can just adopt it. And then that will save you the stress of going to do some self-validation again. So here are some types of research instruments. You have the questionnaire, you have checklists, you have distribution, you have interviews, observations, records, experiments, surveys. All these are types of research instruments, that is, sources or means by which you collect data. So yeah, sometimes you want to collect data and things don't go as planned. It might be delayed to some restrictions. Say like COVID. COVID happened. You were supposed to do some field work or collect data from the field, and then COVID happened. What next? Should that stop your study? No. You can make use of available technologies like your mobile phone. How about doing a phone interview? You can use Zoom meetings for interviews too and focus group discussion. And then you can use Google Form or SurveyMonkey or some other online questionnaire design tool to design your questionnaire and distribute them through emails, social media groups, just to facilitate the distribution of your instrument. So whether something happens or not, as researchers, you want to think of ingenious way to do your research.